All right, guys, we finally get to take a look at the Flames of Ambition DLC patch notes. And there are a ton of combat changes in these patch notes. There's a few new sets that have been added, but for the most part, a complete rework of the champion system, accompanied by a ton of balance changes to things like gear and different weapon types. One big piece of news that I picked up from ESO Live is that we are getting new servers. What does that mean? I don't know, but hopefully it does some good for this game. And without further ado, let's take a look at the changes coming in this patch. So we got 2 new dungeons this patch, and that of course means that we're going to get 3 sets per a dungeon, a light, medium, and heavy armor set. The first light armor set we have is the True Sworn Fury. The 2-piece giving us spell crit. We get spell damage on the 3-piece, max mag on the 4. And then on the 5-piece, 708 spell critical and increases your critical damage by 4%, doubling the bonus to 1416 spell crit and 8% critical damage when you're under 75% health, and then it is quadrupled when you are under 50% health. So this is kind of the Magicka equivalent to the Titanborn set. The next medium armor set, we get weapon damage, weapon crit, weapon damage, really nice 2, 3, 4-piece. And then on the 5-piece, dealing damage with the light or heavy attack grants you a stack of Burning Heart for 5 seconds, up to 5 stacks. And when you have 5 stacks, you generate an Aura of Wrath, granting you Major Berserk, increasing your damage by 10%, and you also grant allies within a 12-meter radius Minor Berserk. So a really interesting damage set here that also buffs people around you. Major Berserk finally being an accessible buff in the game, thanks to that huge nerf that it took. And then the new heavy armor set. We get max health, max stam, max stam. When you bash an enemy, you and up to 11 group members within 15 meters of you gain major heroism for 12 seconds, giving you 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. And this is on an 18-second cooldown. Major heroism, really good buff that I guess we might not have access to anymore in the champion system when we take a look at the breakdown of that on the PTS. So yeah, this is quite a good buff, giving it to everybody as well. Great support set all around. And then the new monster mask, we get max mag, and then dealing flame damage to an enemy grants you Behemoth's Aura for 12 seconds. That reaches up to 12 meters. You and 11 group members in the Aura reduce flame damage taken by 5%, and enemies increase their flame damage taken by 5% on a 15-second cooldown. Interesting set here, kind of a counter to, I guess, Mag DK, as well as a good set for something like a Mag DK. And then in the next dungeon, we have the Unleashed Ritualist set, a new light armor set. This is going to give max mag, and max mag. Really nice 2, 3, 4-piece. And then dealing damage to an enemy applies Ritualist Mark to them for 10 seconds. Enemies within your Ritualist Mark take an additional 16% damage from your summoned pets. Yeah, this looks like a good set for a pet Sork, 100%. The next set we have here is Dagon's Dominion, a new medium armor set. We got weapon damage, max stam weapon damage, and then 492 weapon damage to your area of effect abilities. This could be huge for something like Jabs or anyone who is running primary damage skills that count as AoEs. That's a massive amount of flat weapon damage. This unfortunately won't be affecting your healing unless it's an AoE heal, and that's something you'll have to check on the PTS. And then the new heavy armor set from this dungeon, Fool Killer's Ward. Activating block while in combat places a damage shield on you and 3 group members within 18 meters for 2 seconds that absorbs 4k direct damage, and if the shield breaks, the wearer of the shield will restore 5,680 magicka and stamina on a 30-second cooldown if the shield broke, and a 10-second cooldown if the shield doesn't break, so I guess you can get your sustain out of this. This is a pretty decent amount of sustain, an interesting mechanic in order to get this to proc. What I do like is that this does help your allies around you too, so another really good support set. And then Baron Zadras, this is the new monster mask. The 1-piece, we get the 3 different max stats. I do like that in the 1-piece, good to see it. And then applying a status effect to an enemy will grant you a stack of Zaudran's Ambition for 10 seconds, up to 3 stacks. When you gain 3 stacks, the stacks are removed and you gain 3 ultimate. On gaining ultimate, you cannot gain any additional stacks for 2 seconds. This is a cool set for a lot of different reasons, and I'm excited to see what people will do with this, the 1-piece and the 2-piece. And there have also been some big changes to the just values on sets and stuff like that. They reduced the single stat line of critical chance to 657 from 833. So the single stat line, of course, would be like the 2, 3, 4 piece of a set. They reduced the perfected ability augmenting stat lines of critical chance to 526 down from 666. So those would be the perfected arena weapons. Berserking Warrior, they reduced the amount of weapon crit granted per stack to 241 down from 305. The Dragon Guard Elite set, this will now stack up to 10 times every 0.5 seconds, up to 5 times every 1 second. And they reduced the weapon critical per stack to 275, down from 475. This is a buff to the set, but makes it a little bit trickier to get the full buff going. Eagle Eye and Wrath of the Imperium, they reduced the critical chance these sets 2-piece grant to 1652, down from 1829. Leviathan and Mother's Sorrow, the 5-piece critical rating bonus is now 1528, down from 1937. Man, critical chance is taking a huge punch this patch. Mechanical Acuity, they increased the cooldown of this set to 21 seconds, up from 18. Medusa, they reduced this set's 5-piece bonus of spell crit to 892, down from 900, so a very minor change. Slimecraw, they reduced the 1-piece bonus of critical to 771, down from 833. This is higher than the regular critical value that a 2-piece could get, though, so Slimecraw is getting a little bit of extra points there. And then Tzovigans increased the weapon critical per stack of this set to 177, up from 134, so a big buff to that guy there, too. The Crafted Adept Rider set, this will now permanently grant Major Gallop and Major Expedition when worn, rather than granting Major Evasion while mounted and creating a harmful area that damages and grants Major Evasion to you and group mates after dismounting. So this is basically just a riding set. This would be nice, I think, for maybe players that don't want to PvP, but still ride around really fast on their horse. You don't have to get very far in PvP to get that new Major Gallop, though. Drozuk's Claws, this set now grants up to 129 weapon damage on its 5-piece bonus, and they decrease the weapon damage granted per bleed to 103, down from 133, so kind of just a little balancing of that there. And then Strength of the Automaton is gonna work with bleeding damage. That's good to hear. The Alkosh set will now scale off of 100% of your weapon damage up to a cap of 3,000, rather than basing its value on damage done, so a very big change to that guy there. The Alessian Bulwark set now has a cap of 1320 health recovery. Very interesting. The Alessian set is a really good set, so putting a cap on it, probably a good idea. 1320 is still a ton of health recovery on a 5-piece, though. Selene's will no longer have a 15% chance to proc and is guaranteed to proc now on any non-proc melee damage. It has an increased 6-second cooldown now, and the damage has been decreased to 11,754. Big change to Selene's there. Of course, there is a massive rework to the champion point system, as well as an updated UI and all new stars to choose. I, of course, will make a detailed breakdown of the champion changes on the PTS. A link to that will be below when I get that finished for you guys. So let's jump right into this just to kind of see what's happening. There are a lot more stars in each constellation, and spending points in certain stars will allow you to unlock more connected stars. So there's a little bit more build depth with this system. A big thing that ZeniMax stressed too during the ESO Live is that they wanted this system to be something that this game can grow into as well, so there can be a lot of things added to it. And they also wanted the system to be a lot less invasive on the performance of the game, and the old champion point system actually was pretty invasive because it ran a lot of unnecessary checks. The cost of respeccing your champion points will still be 3,000 gold, but the CP cap has now been lifted and people will be able to spend up to their 3,600 points. And they said the rate at which you gain CP will be accommodated for the cap lift, so I think people might level up a lot faster now. You can still only earn champion points at level 50 or higher as before, and all characters have had their base stats changed in order to make up for the 20% stat boost that you used to get from having 100 points in each of the 3 main sections of the old champion tree. So now people are just going to have way higher base stats, 16k base health up from 8,700, and then 12k of each magicka and stamina. Now this seems like a huge increase at the base value, but if you look at how much magicka, stamina, and health a character has at kind of endgame, these values seem a lot more correct. It's about 4k magicka and stamina, and then quite a bit more health. This will be really nice for PvP. We'll see how damage feels after this patch though, because with all the changes, there's a lot of stuff that has to be tested. Characters will now also take 15% reduced damage at base in order to make up for the loss of the mitigation champion point system. And characters will now also start with 20 weapon and spell damage at level 1 and gain an additional 20 per level up to 1000 at level 50. Base weapon and spell damage, you know what that means, monk builds. In all seriousness, these changes I think are made because the champion point system is going to be less invasive if these base stats are just part of your base stats. Then it doesn't have to go through all the checks that the game had to before for the old system. And I like this too because it makes it a little bit less complicated. A lot of people aren't aware of this 20% stat boost, especially if they're newer players. So yeah, I do really like these changes. We will get on the PTS and we will look at each individual star and go through it together in detail. Now, there have also been some big changes to armor. ZeniMax has added just base armor passives that you get regardless of how many points you do or don't have in the armor tree. So the armor trees are actually staying the same, but these are additional stats you get for each piece of light, heavy, or medium armor that you have on. So let's start with the light armor bonuses. They will reduce your damage taken from magical attacks by 1% per piece worn, reduce the cost of roll dodge by 3% per piece worn, increase your movement speed while sneaking by 5% per piece worn, and then reduce the cost of break free by 5% per piece, and then reduce the cost of bash by 3% per a piece. So a lot of cost reduction on light armor, and I really like the cost reduction in the different stamina departments because that's often a place where light armor can struggle. And yeah, light armor being not heavy, I do like that this makes a little bit more sense. Now, light armor also has some penalties. They'll increase the damage that you take from martial attacks, so that's any physical attack or things like poison, disease, bleed, by 1% per a piece worn, increase the cost of block by 3% per a piece worn, and decrease the damage done with bash by 1% per a piece worn. Now, medium armor is next here, and they actually didn't have any penalties. They just have some bonuses. So medium armor will reduce the cost of sprint by 1% per piece, reduce the cost of sneak by 5%, reduce the cost of block by 3%, reduce the damage you take from an area effect attack by 2% for 2 seconds after you roll. This is super awesome for rolling medium builds in PvP. They really struggle with all the AoE out there right now. And then increase your movement speed by 2% while immune to crowd control. It's not a huge movement speed bonus, but I do like that this has been added as well. Now, the lack of negatives here, I think, is just ZeniMax's choice for a balance perspective. And then moving on to heavy armor, we've got the reduced cost of damage taken from martial attacks by 1%, increase the amount of damage blocked by 1% per piece worn, increase the damage done with bash by 3% per piece worn, and reduce your damage taken while immune to crowd control by 2% per a piece worn. These are nice heavy armor bonuses, obviously just making it a little bit more bulky, but then heavy armor also comes with some penalties, increasing your magical damage taken by 1% per piece, reduce the cost of movement speed by 1% per piece, increase the cost of roll by 3% per piece, and increase the size of your detection area while sneaking by 10% per a piece worn. So it becomes very difficult to sneak, and then of course movement becomes more difficult, but very interestingly, heavy armor will make you take more damage from magic attacks. That is something that is pretty cool, I think, because right now we have a very tanky meta in PvP, and light armor also seems to struggle a little bit compared to the rest, so making light armor good against what is good right now in PvP, I like the direction they kind of went with the different armors. Their goal here was to make them feel a little bit more like that armor, I guess. And, you know, adding these little bits and changes here is good for balance too. Now, are these the right values? I'm not really sure. We'll have to get on the PTS and do some testing, of course. Now, there have been some big changes to armor passives as well. They all scale per piece of armor equipped rather than granting them bonuses while wearing 5 pieces or more. I kind of like this because then you don't have to run a 5-piece armor set. Now you can actually go for a 4-3, and that's the example they use here. And I really like that. That is very cool. So this is going to have a big impact on buildcraft for sure. So light armor, the concentration passive, will now grant 939 spell pen per piece of light armor worn. And that should bring it to about the same value as when you had 5 pieces worn before, but now you'll actually be able to go even further with your spell penetration, so that will be pretty cool to see. Prodigy will now give you 1% spell crit per piece of light armor worn rather than 5-10%, so a nerf to spell crit here. Ouch, light armor. I think medium armor will probably take something similar. And then spell warding, increase the amount of spell resist granted per rank to 726, up from 363. So higher spell resist than before too. Interesting changes to light armor. I do actually like that we get more spell pen here. Penetration's a very good stat for damage in PvP. And then we got that medium armor, agility. This passive will now grant 1 or 2% weapon damage per piece of armor worn, rather than 7 to 15%. Big change in the base weapon damage value there for medium armor. That's a nerf for sure. However, there is a big change into base weapon damage of builds right now. Everyone's going to have 1,000 base weapon damage that they didn't have before. So that's kind of made up for in a way. We'll see how things work out. We'll see how the armors feel when we fight each other. And then dexterity, they decrease the amount of weapon crit granted to 1% per piece of medium armor, down from 1.5%. So yeah, there's the nerf to the critical again. So rapid mending, this passive will now increase your healing taken by 1% for every 1 piece of heavy armor worn at the max rank. A nerf to this as well for heavy armor. If you go full 7 heavy armor, you're still not going to have that old 8%. Resolve, they decrease the amount of armor granted per piece of heavy armor worn to 343, down from 363. Not a big change. And then Revitalize, this passive now increases the resource restored from your fully charged heavy attacks by 4% per piece of heavy armor, rather than 25% overall. Again, another nerf to the heavy armor passives here. So I think the reason we see quite a lot of nerfs to the armor passives is simply because they're getting a whole bunch of new passives that are going to buff them a little bit too. And light armor kind of got the best out of the group here, and I think that was the right call. Light armor is kind of the weaker armor type in PvP, at least right now. So from the PvP perspective, I do like that. And there have been some changes to the combat and abilities. Gaining resistance for a particular damage type no longer grants immunities to its respective status effect, and they adjusted racial passives that once granted immunities to make up for this loss. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it means that we no longer have poison immunity on the Wood Elf. There are now 3 new status effects that have been added to the game for bleed, physical, and magic damage. Bleed damage has the chance to apply hemorrhaging. It deals slightly weaker damage than burning over 4 seconds and applies minor mangle to the target. Physical damage has the chance to apply sundered. It'll deal minor damage and applies minor breach for 4 seconds. And then magic damage has the chance to apply overcharged, dealing minor damage and applies minor magicka steel for 4 seconds. Now the chance to apply these, I'm going to assume, is the exact same as the chance to apply any status effect with any of the other different types of damage. It is cool that we are getting new status effects here. My big concern with this, though, is dot spam. This is just going to apply so many extra negative effects to things. So, yeah, something I think to think about. Moving on to the class changes, looking at Dragon Knight, Draconic Power Dark Talons. This ability and Choking Talons morph will now deal flame damage rather than magic damage, and the Ignite synergy will also deal flame damage. That's a nice change, I think, because DK does benefit from all the fire damage. And then Earthen Heart Petrify, this morph now heals you when the stun ends on the enemy, rather than causing the enemy's next attack to heal their target. Necromancer, no big changes, just some fixes to stuff. Nightblade Assassination, there was a fix to marked target, and basically it's going to count as 2 negative effects now instead of 1. 1 for the major breach and 1 for the mark on the target, similar to something like Power of the Light. In the Shadow Tree, Consuming Darkness, Hidden Refreshes heal will now tick once every second, then half a second, and they adjusted the total healing to remain roughly the same. And the Veiled Strike Surprise Attack morph will now apply Sundered status effect on hit, rather than reduce the target's physical resist by 5% if you successfully flank the target. That's a big change because the burst of Nightblade goes down then, but they still get that guaranteed Sunder, which is going to be like a dot. So if your build has high damage, its damage will probably go down. And if your build has low damage, its damage might go up with a change like that. And then Cripple Debilitate morph. This now applies Overcharge status effect each tick, rather than applying minor magicka steel for the duration. Then moving on to Sorcerer. In Dark Magic Crystal Shard, they reduce the damage of this ability and crystal frags by approximately 2% to match the proper ranged cast time standard. Just some fixes to Daedric Mines, and some fixes to other things on the Sorc. No other real changes. Moving on to Templar, Burning Light. This passive now has a 3-second window between each stack rather than a 1.1 second window to reduce the cadence in which you must consistently attack with the Aedric Spear ability. This is a really good change simply because if you're not spamming jabs, you can actually use your Burning Light passive on Templar again. Hooray! Moving on to Dawn's Wrath, they reduced the cast time of this ability and Dark Flare Morph to 0.8 seconds, down from 1 second. They reduced the damage done by 21% though, so that's a big damage cut for that change in cast time. Honestly, it hitting harder is better, I think, for this skill, so that's a nerf to Solar Flare and Dark Flare for sure. And then they reduced the cost of all of the abilities to 2,700, down from 2,970. And then finally, there was just a little bit of a fix to some passives here. Warden, there are no real changes, just some fixes to this guy. Now, moving on to the bow. Heavy attacking with the bow has a new reload animation that is faster and smoother than before. Awesome. Accuracy, this passive will now grant critical chance rather than weapon critical. So this will affect all of your critical chances instead of just your weapon crit. That's kind of nice because it opens up bow mag builds. And then Snipe, they reduce the cast time to 0.8 seconds, down from 1. This ability and its morphs have a faster, smoother animation in order to support the cast time. 21% damage reduction. They got the cost reduction that Dark Flare did too. Bam, there you go. Snipe nerfed super hard again. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this guy here. And the focused aim morph will now increase in cost reduction rather in damage per a rank. Dual wield blade cloak, they reduced the visual and audio effects of deadly cloak to once every 2 seconds rather than every second to make it less obnoxious. Okay, and then the ultimate rend, the Thrive in Chaos morph. This morph's hitbox now more accurately matches its visual effects, resulting in a significant area of effect increase. So it did always hit that big AoE before, but now it'll have the visual to match. Twin Blade and Blunt, they reworked the passive to grant the following bonuses. Axes now increase your critical damage and healing done by 4% per axe rather than a chance to bleed. Big change to axes there. Yeah, massive change. Daggers will now grant a 3.4% critical chance per a dagger rather than 5% per a dagger. I'll be perfectly honest, 5% per dagger was always really strong. So with the other changes to crit chance, I see this kind of coming down as well. Maces will grant 1650 armor penetration per mace rather than ignoring 10% of the target's physical resist. Oh man, this might be a huge nerf for PvP. Sad times, maces. And then swords will now grant additional weapon damage per sword rather than increasing the damage done. I actually really like that. This makes swords great for healing as well. So a really interesting change, especially with a set like Sword Singer. I quite like that. Now moving on to two-handed changes. The heavy weapons passive, they have also reworked to match the dual wield passives here. And of course they have the same relative values for axes, maces, and swords. There were some fixes to soul magic, some fixes to mist form as well. People just busting you out of mist form, always a good time. And then Werewolf, Hircine's Fortitude morph, they reduced the health and stamina recovery cap of this morph to 333, down from 666. The Savage Strength passive will now grant major resolve on both ranks rather than increasing your armor. I like that because werewolves could get some really staggering defenses, is a good way to put it. They could stack an insane amount of armor if they had the right sets on. So this is a huge nerf to werewolf durability there. These are some nerfs to wolf. Honestly, it's very strong in PvP right now. Now moving on to Fighters Guild, Banish the Wicked will now grant you 3 ultimate whenever you kill an enemy while you have a Fighters Guild ability slotted, rather than 9 ultimate for the Daedra, Undead, or Werewolf. So it'll make farming AoE dungeons a little bit harder, sure, but I really like this change. This is going to be really nice if you want to play an ultimate generation build. It'll be interesting to see how alt-gen builds are this patch. Yeah, a lot of things giving you more ultimate right now. And then just some fixes to some Mages Guild skills. So there were some changes to the Alliance Ward passives. Continuous attacks, this passive now always grants Major Gallop. So you'll always have a speedy horse in PvP now, and rapid maneuvers will no longer grant Major Gallop. That is a massive change to just like the PvP meta. This is huge for console players who have to constantly put rapids on and off of their bars, and PC players have add-ons and stuff for that. I really like that. It'll be interesting to see what they do with rapids now. And then racials, they have made some changes as well, and that's to just kind of go with the champion system rework. The Argonian resistance will no longer grant immunity to the diseased effect, and once again will grant an equal amount of poison resistance. And then the resourceful passive is now going to grant 1,000 max stam as well, and then they reduce the resources restored to 3,125 down from 4,000. The Argonian potion passive is very, very strong, so I think that's a good balance change. And they get max stam now, so opening up the world for Argonian here. Breton spell attunement, increase the magicka recovery granted to 130, so just a very minor change there. Dark Elf, a very minor change to the max stat here as well, 1875 meg and stam rather than 1910. And they can no longer resist the burning status effect. Their flame resist, however, has been doubled to 4,620. High Elf Elemental Talent, this passive will now also grant weapon and spell damage rather than only spell damage. That is huge for High Elf because they have forever been a very magicka-focused class. And then Spell Recharge has been slightly reduced down to 625, and it can now proc for the Resource Restore off of any ability used rather than only class abilities. So some nice buffs to High Elf there. Imperial Red Diamond, this passive no longer restores health, magicka, and stamina whenever you deal direct damage. They increase the cost reduction for all abilities to 6%, up from 3%. I like that because in order to get the Red Diamond passive to be beneficial, you effectively have to always be attacking, so that's a good change there. Khajiit Feline Ambush, they increase the critical damage and healing done to 12%, up from 10. And then Lunar Blessing, they increase the max health, magicka, and stam to 915, up from 825. Little bit of a buff to Khajiit there. Nord Resist Frost will no longer be immune to the chilled effect, but they got 4,620 frost resist now. And Rugged, they reduced the armor granted from this passive to 2,600, down from 3,960. A huge nerf to the durability of Nord there. And then Brawny, they reduced the max stam granted from this passive to 1,000, down from 2,000. Swift Warrior will now grant weapon and spell damage rather than just weapon damage. Magicka Orcs, that's what I'm talking about. Kind of a nerf to the stam there. And then Unflinching Rage will now heal for 2,125 health when you deal damage every 4 seconds, rather than 600 health when you deal damage with a weapon attack every 4 seconds. Redguard Adrenaline Rush, they increase the stamina restored to 1,005, up from 950, and it will now proc on any damage done rather than direct damage. Awesome for the Redguard Sustain. And then Wood Elf Hunter's Eye, the movement speed and armor penetration from this passives no longer requires you to dodge roll to gain, and instead are permanent effects. Oh my god. Now, it has been nerfed, however, so we only have 5% movement speed increase, and we only get 950 additional armor penetration. I'm going to be honest, though, 5% movement speed, I'll take that. I really like this change. Go Wood Elf. They are no longer immune to the poison status effect, though, so there you go. So there you go, guys, a breakdown of the patch notes for the new patch. Of course, there's not a lot of information about the new champion system in the patch notes, and I will be making a video going over all of the different changes to the champion system. We'll be taking a look at all the different stars, etc., and we'll be looking at the system in-game on the PTS. So be sure to check that video out. If not, right now, it will be down below in the description for you. If you want to send in a clip for the top 5, or if you want to send in a build to be featured on the channel, you can send it to KristoferESO@hotmail.com. Check out my website, KristoferESO.com, for written guides to all my builds and a hub for all of my ESO content. Catch that live gameplay on Twitch, and of course, give me a follow on Twitter if you guys want to keep up to date with me. We are sponsored by What the Fast. They're a VPN for gamers. They can give you better ping to your favorite games, free to try for the first month. Link down below in the description. And of course, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do this, so thank you so much for helping out. Thank you everybody for tuning in and watching today. Again, I want to hear what you guys think about these changes, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good night, everyone.